There is a millennial individual who cannot remember the last time they wanted something for no reason. Not a promotion, not a salary number, not a milestone on a 5-year plan, something else. Something that existed before the plan, before the resume, before the version of themselves that learned to want things in straight lines with measurable outcomes attached. They are sitting at a desk on a Wednesday evening. The work is done. The apartment is quiet. And if someone asked them right now, not what they are working toward, not what their goals are, but what they actually want, the question would land in a strange place. A place that used to have an answer. A place that now returns mostly silence. This is not depression. This is not numbness. This is not a sign that something is gone. Wrong in any clinical sense. This is what happens when a generation spends long enough being practical, that the part of them that was never practical, the part that wanted things without a business case, that imagined futures without a spreadsheet, that dreamed in directions no career counselor would have approved, goes very quiet, not gone, just quiet. The millennial individual does not know exactly when it happened. That is the thing about this particular loss. It did not announce itself. There was no morning they woke up and decided to stop. There was no event, no rupture, just a long, slow, entirely reasonable series of adjustments. And then one Wednesday evening, the silence where the dreams used to be. There was a version of the millennial individual that existed before the practicality set in. This version was not sensible. This version wanted things that made no economic sense. Wanted to write something. Wanted to travel somewhere specific for a reason that was purely aesthetic. Wanted to learn an instrument not to perform, but to hear themselves make a sound they had never made before. Wanted to build something with their hands. Wanted to live somewhere unusual. Wanted to spend an entire summer doing one thing that produced nothing useful at all. These wants were not elaborate. They were not even particularly dramatic. They were just wants. The ordinary, undirected, slightly embarrassing wanting of a person who has not yet learned that wanting things you cannot justify is a luxury you may not be able to afford. The millennial individual was born between 1981 and 1996. They came of age in a specific cultural moment. The late 1990s and early 2000s told them, repeatedly and enthusiastically, that they could be anything. The message arrived through after-school specials and guidance counselors and graduation speeches and magazine articles and the general ambient optimism of a decade that had not yet met. 2008. Follow your passion. Do what you love and the money will follow. You can be anything you set your mind to. The millennial individual heard this. They believed it, or at least they held it as a background assumption, the way you hold an assumption about the weather, not consciously, just as part of the operating system. And then the operating system encountered the economy. The 2008 financial crisis did not kill the millennial individual's dreams directly. It did something more precise. It changed the cost-benefit analysis of dreaming. Before 2008, the dream had a plausible path attached to it. You wanted to write. You could figure out how to write. You wanted to travel. You could figure out how to travel. The wanting and the doing had a relationship that felt navigable, even if it was not guaranteed. After 2008, the path became less clear and the cost of being on the wrong path became much higher. Student debt that had been manageable became less manageable in a market where the degree it purchased bought less than advertised. The safety net that was supposed to catch anyone who took a risk and failed turned out to have significant holes in it. The people who had gambled on passion and lost were not landing softly. The rational response. And the millennial individual is, among other things, deeply rational, was to recalibrate, to tighten the radius of the dream, to want things that had a higher probability of being achievable, to stop investing emotional energy in directions that the market had just demonstrated were not reliable. This recalibration felt like wisdom. It felt like maturity. It felt like the responsible thing to do. And it was, in many ways, all of those things. It was also the beginning of a slow subtraction. The millennial individual did not sit down one day and make a list of the things they were giving up. That is not how it works. That is never how it works. What happened was, smaller than that, repeated, quiet, compounding. The novel they were going to write got postponed to after the certification was done. The certification led to a better position. The better position had more responsibility. The more responsibility consumed the evenings that were going to go to the novel. The novel became something they were going to get back to. The getting back to became a phrase they stopped saying out loud because saying it out loud required. Believing it and believing it required. Something they could not locate anymore. The band they were going to start. With 2 people they met in their mid-20s. The rehearsals got harder to schedule. Everyone got busier. The logistics of 3 adults with jobs and leases and competing obligations proved more resistant than the idea had suggested. The band became a thing they almost did. Almost became the word that quietly replaced someday. The place they were going to live for a year. The city in another country. The neighborhood that felt like the right kind of strange. Became a trip they took for 10 days. The 10 days were good. The year became a fantasy they filed filed under things that made sense when there was more flexibility, and flexibility had been decreasing for several years in a consistent direction. Each subtraction was reasonable. Each one made sense given the circumstances. Each one was the correct response to a specific constraint, and the constraints kept arriving, and the subtractions kept being made. And somewhere in the accumulation of reasonable adjustments, the person who had wanted things for no reason became a person who wanted things for very good reasons, and only those things. Here is what the millennial individual built in the space where the dream used to be a career, a competence, a version of themselves that was useful, reliable, deliverable. A LinkedIn profile that accurately described a person who had accomplished measurable things in documented order. A reputation, professional and personal, for getting things done, for being the one who figures it out, for not needing to be managed, for showing up. This is not nothing. This is genuinely something. The career is real. The competence is real. The getting things done is real. But there is a specific kind of identity that is built entirely from the outside from what is produced, from what is delivered, from what can be pointed to and evaluated. And the millennial individual, without fully intending to, built exactly this kind of identity, brick by brick, over about 15 years. While the inside identity, the one that wanted things for no reason, that imagined futures for the pleasure of imagining them, that was made of preferences and curiosities and half-formed ideas about what kind of life would feel like a life waited in a room nobody visited much. Any more research on identity development in adults describes something called identity foreclosure. It refers to the state of having committed to an identity without fully exploring what identity one actually wants. The person who becomes what circumstance suggested rather than what internal exploration would have chosen. The path of least resistance taken so consistently it became the only path. The millennial individual did not foreclose their identity in any dramatic way. They just kept making the practical choice, and the practical choice, repeated enough times, becomes the self. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from losing something you never officially had. The millennial individual cannot mourn the novel they did not write the way they would mourn a finished manuscript that burned. The novel was never written. It existed only as a possibility, and mourning a possibility feels vaguely embarrassing, vaguely self-indulgent, vaguely like the kind of thing someone would tell you to get perspective about so it does not get mourned. It just becomes one of those things, a category of things, the things that were going to happen and then did not, quietly over time without drama. The album, the trip, the business, the year abroad, the creative project that existed completely in potential and never converted. These unlived possibilities do not register as losses in any official way. Nobody sends condolences. There is no ceremony. There is no moment where the world acknowledges that something real was given up. The giving up was too gradual and too quiet and too continuous to produce a moment that would justify acknowledgement, and so it sits unnamed in the specific interior space of the millennial individual who is doing well by all external measures and who sometimes, in the quiet of a Wednesday evening, feels a kind of hollow that they cannot locate the source of. The hollow is the source. The hollow is where the undirected wanting used to live. The part that wanted things for no reason except that they wanted them. The part that is still there, still technically present, but so unexercised and so long unvisited that it barely makes a sound anymore. Around 2015, something interesting happened. The culture found a new use for the aspiration the millennial individuals still had but could not direct toward the old dreams. Hustle culture arrived and said, your wanting is valid. Your ambition is valid. Point it here. Point it at the side hustle, at the personal brand, at the monetizable passion, at the version of doing what you love that produces a revenue stream that justifies the doing. And the millennial individual, who still had plenty of wanting left, it had just been rerouted through the practical, recognized something in this message. It sounded like permission. It sounded like a way to want things again without abandoning the rational framework the last decade had made mandatory. So many of them tried it. Turned the creative impulse into a content strategy. Turned the curiosity into a podcast. Turned the aesthetic sensibility into a brand. Turned the thing they loved into the thing they monetized. And then watched with a confusion that took a while to identify, as the thing they loved became subtly different in the presence of the monetization and dot. The research on this is consistent and has been replicated across multiple studies. Intrinsic motivation, doing something because it is inherently meaningful or enjoyable, decreases when external rewards are introduced. The phenomenon is called the over-justification effect. When you start paying yourself to do the thing you used to do for free, the internal reason for doing it quietly steps back. The thing starts to feel like work, because it is work now. You made it work, very efficiently, very rationally. The dream that survived the 2008 recalibration sometimes did not survive the monetization. The millennial individual is sitting at a desk on a Wednesday evening. They are successful in the ways that success success has been defined for their generation. They earn enough. They have built something that can be pointed to. They have the apartment and the career progression and the competence that took years to develop. And sometimes, between the last work task of the day and the first task of tomorrow, there is a window. A small one. An unscheduled few minutes where nothing is required of them and they could, theoretically, want anything. In those minutes, they notice something. The wanting is slower than it used to be. The imagination, when invited to produce something, some direction, some vision, some image of a future that is not simply an extrapolation of the present, produces less than it once did. It is not empty. It is just slower, less practiced, less fluent in a language it has not been asked to speak for a long time. They think about the things they used to want. Not with bitterness, not with regret exactly, with a kind of quiet curiosity about the person who wanted those things. That person feels both very familiar and slightly distant, like someone they know well but have not seen in a while, like someone who is still there but has been waiting in a room nobody visits. Much psychologists who study what they call possible selves, the versions of ourselves we imagine we might become, note that these imagined futures serve important psychological functions. They provide direction. They provide motivation. They provide a sense of continuity between who we are now and who we might be. When the possible selves become too narrowly defined, too closely aligned with what is already happening rather than what might happen, something in the psychological architecture gets smaller. The millennial individual did not intend for their possible selves to narrow. It happened the way all the other things happened, gradually, reasonably, in response to circumstances that made narrowing the sensible choice. Here is what the millennial individual has not lost. Though they sometimes cannot find it, the capacity to want things for no reason still exists. It has not been removed. It has been quieted, underused, gently redirected for many years. But it is the same capacity that makes them linger at the window of a bookshop they did not plan to enter. That makes them slow down when a piece of music does something unexpected. That makes them feel sometimes a pull towards something they cannot name, a direction that is not on the 5-year plan, not on the LinkedIn profile, not on any list they have made. That pull is not nostalgia. It is not the past asking to be relived. It is the present asking to be larger than it currently is. The millennial individual who stopped dreaming without noticing did not stop being a person who is capable of dreaming. They became a person who got very good at other things and let the dreaming atrophy the way any capacity atrophies. When it is not used, atrophy is not permanent. That is the thing about a muscle. It can be rebuilt. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Not with a grand gesture toward reinvention or a personal brand pivot or a TED. Talk about following your passion. Quietly on a Wednesday evening, in the window between the last work task and the first task of tomorrow. The question is not what should the millennial individual want. The question is simply, what do they want? Not what makes sense. Not what is achievable. Not what fits the framework of a life that has been organized around the achievable and the sensible for 15 years. Just what do they want? The answer might be small. It might be a book they want to read with no purpose, a walk they want to take with no destination, a conversation they want to have with no agenda, or it might be something larger, something that has been waiting in the quiet room for a while, something patient, something that is not given. The millennial individual did not stop dreaming. Because they stopped being a dreamer, they stopped dreaming. Because dreaming was the one thing they never thought to protect. That is the thing worth knowing. And it is not too late to know it. Thanks for watching. If you still remember what you used to want, leave it in the comments. That version of you is still there.